These are my top 10 sci-fi audiobooks, whether they are standalone books or series. I know I'm leaving a lot of great books off this list, but these are just the ones that really stood apart for me. Links to the Audible pages of each audiobook below. Number 10, Off to Be the Wizard by Scott Meyer, narrated by Luke Daniels. This is a funny kind of kitschy story about a kid who discovers that reality is a computer program, then he flees back in time to medieval England. It's not a deep book, and the writing isn't amazing, but it's really fun and definitely original. There are 3 books in the Magic 2.0 series, but I like the first one, much better than the follow-ups. Number 9, Under the Dome, Stephen King, narrated by Raul Esparza. If you like getting a lot of hours for your credit, Under the Dome fits the bill at 34 hours runtime. It's really only science fiction in the loosest of definitions, that is, because of the dome. It's really, though, about characters in a small Maine town and the dynamics of how that town reacts to a big dome getting plopped down on them. Not one of Stephen King's best, and it can get a little dark, but I enjoyed my 34 hours in Chester's Mill, Maine, and as with most Stephen King books, the narration was top-notch. Number 8, Ender's Game 20th Anniversary Edition by Orson Scott Card. This is probably one of the oldest books on the list. Ender's Game is a classic that stands up pretty well. This is probably better if you like a little more military tactic minutia in your sci-fi, and the 20th Anniversary Edition on Audible delivers with some pretty good production with 3 narrators and a runtime of about 12 hours. Number 7, Red Rising by Pierce Brown, narrated by Tim Gerard Reynolds. Red Rising starts in the mines of Mars hundreds of years in the future and follows Darrow, who is a Red, one of the lowest social castes on Mars. As he figures out the world is nothing like he and his people have believed, this book gets high marks for being such an original world and story. The writing and narration were very good too. All 3 books were great in the series. It's memorable, well worth the credits to get all 3. Number 6, Old Man's War by John Scalzi, narrated by William Dufresne. Though I like most of John Scalzi's humorous brand of sci-fi, none of them compare, in my opinion, to the first book in his Old Man's War series. The concept is great, implanting old people's consciousnesses into clones to fight an interstellar war, and it is truly funny. I like most of the many sequels too, but none of them were quite as good as the original. Number 5, Star Wars, The Thrawn Trilogy by Timothy Zahn, narrated by Mark Thompson. This is one of the older Star Wars book series, but man, is it great. It's widely considered to be Timothy Zahn's best, and the narration by Mark Thompson will blow your mind with his pitch-perfect Han and Luke, etc. The production of the 20th Anniversary Edition with all the sound effects adds a lot instead of distracts, which is unique. It's a must-listen if you're mildly interested in Star Wars books. All 3 books were just as good to me, 44 hours if you bought all 3. Number 4, The Martian by Andy Weir, narrated by R.C. Bray. The Martian pretty much took over Audible when it first came out. When I finally listened to it, I saw why. It is crazy interesting and hilariously funny. The narrator nails the deadpan humor, and it is whatever the equivalent of a page-turner for audiobooks is. It's not a series, but a standalone, and it kind of skates that whole is it sci-fi thing. It's certainly set in the future in a very sci-fi kind of situation, but it really feels like the technology that we have today. But it certainly is an amazing book and well worth the credit. Number 3, the Bobiverse series by Dennis E. Taylor, narrated by Ray Porter. How I love the Bobiverse series. It just has so many things that keep me interested. The amazingly original idea of putting the consciousness of a man who had been frozen in the 21st century into a space probe that is effectively immortal just gives you so much to work with. I feel like I'm really exploring the galaxy with the Bobs. Add to that, it's well written, well narrated, and generally upbeat. It's one of my all-time favorites on Audible. All 3 books in the series were great. Number 2, The Dark Tower series by Stephen King. The only reason the Dark Tower series doesn't get number 1 on my list is because although it certainly is sci-fi, it's probably a bit more epic fantasy and possibly a western as well. The writing and narration are second to none, literally, and it's a true saga with 7 books. It's over 140 hours in total if you got all the books. That's a lot of time to spend with the quartet, but I loved every single second of it. Number 1, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, narrated by Will Wheaton. It's strange, when I think of why Ready Player One is one of the best in my head, I don't have a clear reason why. I think it's because I love the concept, or perhaps just the idea of the oasis, a virtual reality universe that is far too likely in our future. But then I wonder if maybe it's because I was a child of the 80s and the nostalgia of this book is just terrific. The writing was great, and Will Wheaton does a good job with the narration, but there's just something about Ernest Cline's Ready Player One that makes it number one on my list. Links in the description, and please subscribe if for no other reason you can find my channel again when you realize how good the books are on this list and you want to find it again.